Good day, everyone. It's wonderful to see so many people joining us for our fifth Impact Symposium. Today, we will be getting started very shortly. In about a minute or so's time, we're just giving any of the final remainder people the chance to join as we'll kick off. We're aiming to be kicking off on time. Thank you very much for joining us today. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat function. It's a great opportunity to connect with colleagues across the sector. So please feel free to introduce yourselves. Thank you. We do also have a poll running. Those of you who hopefully can see my screen where you are invited, and we will be using polls to just start participating. You can see where some of the results are already starting to come in as well. So we'd love to invite you to join and participate in the poll that you can see on the screen whilst we wait to get things underway. Right. Well, we're on the hour, so to speak. So good day, everybody. Thank you very much for joining this fifth annual Impact Symposium. We thank you for joining us to consider a very specific topic this year, which is engagement and impact and how we navigate this unfolding area. And we'd like to welcome you to this event. I'm Laura Tucker, the CEO from Hive, and it's great to be with you today. So for the first time, REF has included engagement specifically in the REF guidelines that are yet to be released, but we have the headlines about this component coming in, and it now forms part of the phrasing for what was the impact section. So we thought it'd be helpful to dive into this, into some more detailed as a topic to discuss for this year's annual symposium, and start asking colleagues from different universities to share their perspectives. But as always, with our approach, it's to try and deliver some practical insights for everybody whilst we're still waiting from the REF perspective. Actually, there is a much broader engagement and impact agenda, so to speak. So hopefully, we can have some very fruitful discussions today. We're very excited to be here with you, and there'll be some very useful takeaways that will support you in your own impact journeys, so to speak. So thank you very much for participating in this poll. It's great to see what people are talking about, and it actually seems fairly consistent where everyone is waiting for the guidance in terms of the REF perspective. But let's dive into the agenda for today. So in terms of the agenda, we're splitting the symposium up into this event, and then there's going to be a second one hosted for the Asia Pacific region in early 2025. So we have a shorter agenda for this year's symposium because we're splitting it into two, and this is making it more focused today. We're more focused on the UK side, although hopefully for those of you from joining us from abroad and overseas will still find value and helpful content from the sharing of practices that we have today. So we have two main panel discussions that we will dive into after a brief an introduction from my side, which we're bringing together a variety of perspectives, as is our preference, to discuss this topic and of really now how do we navigate and how are people in practice navigating the engagement and impact journeys. So by way of housekeeping, to kick us off, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat function. It's a wonderful opportunity to connect with peers and colleagues across the space who may be facing similar challenges or have identified similar opportunities and to what you're seeing as well. We will be taking questions throughout the panel discussions from everyone from you as attendees. So please feel free to post them into the Q&A function if you can. This will help us to keep track of any questions coming through. And we'll try to get through as many of them as we possibly can during those panel sessions in the event today. As always, if we don't reach the question for any reason, you're always welcome to drop us a line, or we can follow up separately and try to provide a bit more of an answer as well. So this event is being live streamed on YouTube, and we'll share the link in the follow-up materials as well for anyone that would like to reference this or share it with colleagues as well afterwards. We will be using Slido for a few polls, so please do have your phones to hand as well, as we saw already today. Okay. So who are we? We thought we'd share a brief introduction. So thank you very much for everyone for joining, and in particular our fantastic panelists who are going to get us underway. Um, you may know us as Hive. You may also be familiar with us as Vertigo Ventures, which is what we formerly were. For anyone joining us for the first time, it's welcome to our annual symposium events. And we'd like to kick off this event with this brief introduction and share some insights from our perspective of what we're seeing across the higher education side. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with our work, our mission is to embed impact reporting for a sustainable world, because we believe if you can measure it, you can manage it. And we're working with organizations to support them on this journey. We work with organizations around the world. We started off working in the UK, very much in a not-for-profit space, and within higher education from 2012 because of the incorporation of impact in the REF that we saw for the first time. But we've been growing geographically since then, and we typically work around the world and across sectors as well. Some of you may be familiar with the Times Higher impact rankings. Over 6 years ago, we partnered with Times Higher to create and to support the creation of the methodology for the impact ranking. We worked with THE to create, our goal is really to create a platform for sustainability in higher education that provides sort of global visibility and recognition for the contributions that universities around the world are making in sustainability efforts and towards the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Hopefully, we have lots of reoccurring and familiar faces with us today. This is our 5th symposium, and for anyone that is interested on previous symposium events, they are all available on our website as well, which I'll ask my colleague Alex just to post into the chat as well, for anyone that is interested in previous sessions as well. This one will also be noted there and shared accordingly. What we have observed, so we've been working in this space for over 12 years now, and things have been changing. The impact agenda has been growing and evolving quite substantially. What that means from our perspective is actually how we see that universities are adapting to this agenda and to this space. Impact is still, engagement and impact is still seen as new for a lot of people and a lot of organizations. Most people and organizations we find come to this area wanting to better understand what impact is and, what they're doing in terms of reporting and how they can improve that. And the way that we approach this, and so we thought I'd offer this framework as hopefully something that's useful to keep in mind as you're on your own journeys embedding impact within your organizations. Is often we find that organizations are starting through this journey. We start off very much in this discovery stage of what is impact, what does it mean, what does it mean for us? There are many different definitions out there, for example. So just aligning on actually what do we mean by impact is a really helpful place to start. And then working across from left to right to understand actually what does good look like for us as an organization? What do we want to be doing well at in terms of this space? And how does that then inform our strategy as an organization? How are we going to go about embedding engagement and impact? What we found, particularly how it came in because of the REF in 2014 with impact, for example, it came in very much from a project level. We need to get case studies created, but actually now because this agenda is broadened in terms of other areas looking for this kind of information and wanting to be able to, leverage and utilize what the engagement activity and impact has been by the organizations for things like the ranking. Actually, what is our organization strategy? How are we going to do that in practice? Because it has widened and broadened out from what started off as quite a specific focus. And that requires engaging with different parts of the organization. Traditionally, this may sit within the research office, for example, and working with those researchers that are particularly focused on creating case studies. But actually, what we've seen is actually how this has broadened out to wider groups of people. In different contexts, we find that in Australia, for example, There's a big emphasis with early career researchers, for example, because it's very much about what difference you're making. They have grant funding with impact, for example, and there's not an assessment in place. So really the drivers for it are quite different. So engaging that group of people, and what we'll talk about today, because of this emphasis with the engagement side, is actually um, how we need to, what we're seeing is actually that how different parts, different teams within the university can collaborate and coordinate to support the organization's journey overall. And then actually, one of the key opportunities that we see, that we do see some universities taking advantage of, so to speak, and moving towards, but actually there's still a lot of scope here, is around management of this kind of information and data and insights onto performance. And actually, how are we delivering against that strategic plan? And as a university in our local community, as a civic university, what is the difference that we're making? So actually, incorporating those insights as part of business as usual performance reporting and understanding what we're doing is something that we see is still a lot of room for opportunity to make the most out of, because then we can really optimize our work and focus on amplifying the great work that is going on within the organizations. I mean, we saw that amplification piece once the case studies for the first time were produced, how they were repurposed into marketing and comms material, for example. But now I think, from that initial side, it's grown substantially even from that piece as well. And that's something we'll dive into in a bit more detail. So how do we then reuse and amplify and showcase this wonderful work that's going on? So what would be helpful, I think, is maybe we could start with a reflection, which is, where do you think you're at in your organizations on your own impact journeys? Where do you think the organization is at the moment? So we'll just invite you to participate in the poll. Can scan the QR code in the top left corner, and there is a code which you can add into to be able to participate. What are your thoughts? Hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Great to see these responses coming through. Yeah. So everyone is somewhere in the sort of early middle part of that journey. Middle part, great. It just really reflects the diversity of actually where people are at with their different journeys. So thank you for sharing. A key message here is you're not alone, and not everyone is on this path together. Interesting. Great. All right. Well, thank you for sharing that. Um, that engagement side is particularly pertinent to the engagement emphasis and piece of actually, which is the topic of today's symposium. So in a funny way, it's actually it's mirroring it very nicely. And that's why what we'll come on to now is actually how can we engage actually internally to support engagement in terms of reporting as well. So how do we approach this? So I'll just briefly share actually how we're looking at this impact journey and what we find has worked well from our experience. When we started off on this path about 12 years ago, we were always starting with blank piece of paper, thinking, how do we articulate the work that we're doing? And so we started creating an impact taxonomy. And for those of you who are familiar with our work, you will be familiar with this. And what's really it's grown and evolved over the years, but what's really come to light is actually how taking a systematic approach to thinking about pathways and engagement activities and impact, we've been finding is really helpful for them being able to report and collect and curate this kind of information from a reporting perspective. So this is something that has really grown. I mean, from our side, because there is this increasing need for actually how we use and talk about this work. Actually taking an increasingly systematic approach has been helpful, and actually layering on tagging, because the key thing here is that we have lots of different audiences. So whether it's Hep C or REF or CAREF or whoever wants this kind of data, marketing and comms, how do we reuse it and curate it in an organized, systematic way just the once so that we can readily do so? The way that we typically look at it in terms of embedding these processes, because this is often new for most organizations and people, is that we find it's a combination of resources. So, training materials for your team, the wide internal teams, to actually understand what it is, training, those of you who are experienced impact officers or on the engagement side, you already have a program of activity and resources that you probably support. From our side, we typically also get involved in service, what we see as services. So, um, how do we support internal assessments of that performance, for example? Are we putting our best foot forward? How do we support with that capacity and capability as well? And then, actually, from a systematic perspective, we do support it with software as well. So what we find is that what can we be doing right now? So if we think about REF, we're halfway through the impact period, for example. One of the key focuses that we see at the moment is curating this information and evidence now is what's really a focus. In Hong Kong at the moment, they've got a year to go until their submission, and so their focus is very much on running internal assessments about how the case studies are doing, how mature they are, ready they are for submission, and building up those impact case studies. And that's a process that we actually support throughout our from a software perspective. And it's having gone through this process that enabled us to create it. And we find that a systematic approach is helpful in terms of actually supporting higher scores as the output from that. And whilst we're talking about assessments in particular, I wanted to start off by looking at assessments, and in particular because of the engagement side of things. And we have a definition. So what I wanted to share today was particularly around use cases. So what I think most people here are probably thinking about engagement in terms of engagement and impact in terms of the REF, but actually from our side as well, it's not just about REF. And I have 4 use cases that I wanted to share that hopefully provide are sort of thought-provoking in some way, because these could be leveraged to support traction internally for this idea of doing this as we go, little and often, and building momentum and really embedding this culture and supporting that internal engagement so that we can have a better coordinated and strategic approach to engagement and impact. Because from what we see, it makes sense to take more of that holistic view rather than purely compliance. So what we know, what we have so far, we've seen that engagement has come in. From our side, the way that we typically think about it is, and as indicated here, is really about the activity. What are we doing? How are people engaging beyond higher education? So in the public domain, and you can see from this definition, some ideas are indicated here, but really, how are we engaging beyond higher education? How are we translating, using, incorporating that work to the benefit beyond? And what we've seen, if we look at the sort of history of impact assessments, is how they've grown. So this is not something new per se. We had the first pilot back in 2005, for those of you who may remember that. But what was interesting was that in the Australian context, so different countries around the world have been increasingly incorporating sort of knowledge exchange, translation, engagement, these concepts into their assessment pieces. And in Australia, in the 2018 approach framework, they actually called it the engagement and impact assessment. And so what's interesting is actually, whilst we're waiting for more frame of reference, from my perspective, actually, it might be quite useful to understand what happened there? How can we learn from this? As well. So we'll dive into that shortly. And obviously from the UK side, it's been flagged in terms of REF in 2029, whilst we still wait lots of information. But just something to share as well, that this area is growing, and what I mean in terms of beyond REF. And there's also different components to it. It's not just about understanding the activities that we're doing as an organization, but if anyone saw literally just this week, the government shared a press release about their civil society covenant. And it's really talking about their relationship with civil society. But what I thought was interesting, and I wanted to share because we've seen in different conversations around this engagement piece, is actually how do we incorporate or how do we consider the environment in which these engagements are taking place. Like, is it a one-off? Is this a sustained engagement over a long period of time? From some of our work with conservation projects, for example, we've seen, issues around so particularly the issues to be considered around Indigenous peoples and equity, for example. And so the ethics, equity, that side of it, actually, how do we engage, is a really important part of the engagement discussion, basically. And so it's not just purely about, right, what events have we done? How many people have attended? Actually, this frame of reference in terms of that environment in which these are happening and coming to be is something that we want to consider as well. And so whilst there's more to come on this, I actually thought it was quite interesting, these 4 pillars that they shared in this covenant as well. And it just reminded me about best practices in the ways that we engage as well, which I think is something we'll be seeing more of based on what we heard in our symposium last year as well. So what do we mean in terms of impact? So if we talked about engagement, and from our side, we're looking at that activity perspective. In terms of impact, we're very much looking at the changes that occur. What are the benefits? It can be all throughout that engagement process. There might be, outcomes being generated as we go. And, this change can be positive or negative, but broadly what we're looking at is what difference are we making to society, the environment, and the economy in the broadest possible sense. Now, you'll see also the more slightly more specific ref definition as well. But at the headline, this is the concept that we're looking at. And so for us, it's really this concept of change is what we tend to anchor it in. And just to turn that into practice, because I'm aware we want to crack into the panels as well. This is a grossly simplified pathway, but it's useful for illustrative purposes for when you want to write up and talk about. We find it helpful to talk about when we're writing up what we would call the engagement pathway or the pathway and the impact. It's messy, it can be convoluted, all these the activities, the outcomes, everything could be all happening at the same time. But our experience has been, and for anyone who's had to write this up, we still need to be able to provide a clear narrative that people can readily understand. And so for us, this just illustrates in this narrative, what we would see as sort of the activity side, more that engagement piece versus, a whole spectrum of what impact can be. It can be in this example with policy, it can be everything from stimulating debate all the way through to a new policy being enacted, and then the ripple impacts that happen as a result of that impact going into place. So it very much is the spectrum, but I thought it would be helpful just to share that concept. So why is this important now? Well, in terms of ref, we've seen that we have the inclusion of engagement, basically, and the discipline level statement has come back after it was removed in 2021, but we still have this inclusion of engagement. So this is why we thought it'd be helpful to talk about it as well. There are a couple, we've seen these. I'm not going to dive into this in more detail. We do other webinars, particularly around the ref and more comprehensively, but it's more about this inclusion of engagement as a very specific term. It's always been implied, when we think about the case studies, it's always been written up. We come through in the environment statements, but what we'd love to see is actually, from what you're observing or what are you doing since seeing the changes that have come through into the ref. What's this doing from your side in the organization? Even though I know we're still waiting to some degree. Yep. Yep. Yeah. I think that first point around we're assuming 2021 impact is 2029 is probably one that we see resonates very commonly across the sector. Yeah. It's what we're seeing that, so this is very, yeah, this is very consistent, I guess, across the responses generally. Though I'd love to see whoever posted yes, what it is, because in the UK context, people have been on this journey for a long time, and and engagement is very much part of that. So it's more continuing what was. So this is really interesting to see. In other parts of the world, what's interesting is that there's often been more of a focus, as well on some of that activity reporting, from what we see. So commercialization income, partnerships with industry. Sometimes there's been more partnership and more emphasis on that as well. Yeah. Mm. Really, really interesting. Yeah. So really the questions here is actually we're carrying on, from what I'm seeing is it's like we're carrying on as business as usual, and particularly in the UK side. But actually it's more about how we're going to talk about it from a reporting perspective is the big question mark. Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing that. So why does it matter that the ref guidelines are likely to change? So in the UK context, uh, there's funding attached to this, plain and simple, I guess, in that sense. There is it. The ref in the UK informs the QR funding pot, which I'm sure most people from at least here from the UK side will be aware of. In other parts of the world, the assessments actually haven't necessarily informed funding, or it's not as transparent as to how it does that. Um, so yeah, in this particular the why context, why people are so interested in it is because of that influence on funding. There is a really interesting diagram or depiction of it from on the Oxford website, which I find really helpful just to really clarify what this means. And I guess to that point of we're expecting it to be the same. So the interesting parts here are that in terms of this, we're not expecting any changes from the impact case studies. We do see this reintroduction of the disciplinary level. So I think from my side is actually to what extent is this likely to be similar or different to what we've seen before? And then how else? I mean, obviously this affects the weighting slightly as well, particularly for small units as well, where you're going to have one statement and maybe one case study because of that reduced threshold. So, there will be some interesting implications in terms of actually the curation of that submission. And how is that going to come through? How is engagement going to come through these different parts of the ref? So this is what remains to be seen, and I'm really hoping that the panels will explore this as well in some detail. Is it through the ethics side is going to come through in different parts, the environment, etc. So there's lots to be seen, but the headline is in the UK side, it's worth, there's funding attached to it, and all eyes are on it from that perspective. What I wanted to put here as a frame of reference, just for for something that we find particularly interesting. For those of you who aren't familiar, I mentioned earlier about the EI assessment in Australia. Well, they actually had this separate engagement narrative. So I just thought I'd share that in case it's useful. Obviously, we have no idea on the guidelines and we don't have a separate narrative per se in the same way, but I thought it was helpful for a few reasons. Just because of the sorts of information that's included, they did report engagement indicators as well. And then the impact section was very similar to what we had in 2014 with the case studies, and then this sort of approach, but because they only had one case study per UOA, it was more of a discipline level statement by default. So what's interesting here, and again, just hopefully stimulate some thinking, this is what the engagement narrative was asking for the universities to write about. You can see here that they're really looking at the purpose of these engagements and to what extent were they engaging in activities externally, and who was it that they're working with. They also then had the data side, which seems to me equivalent from a Hepsi perspective, maybe not as much, and we'll come into that. But what was really interesting was they actually provided examples, and again, keen to see or in the chat box any reactions to this. But what I found really interesting was that they provided ideas, not an exhaustive list, of impact engagement indicators that people could be tracking and including in their returns as well into their broader statement piece, which I thought was really interesting to share. I know in the UK, we might be looking at sort of the KEF and Hepsi, etc. But I just thought it'd be interesting to share another perspective. All this is available online for anyone that wants to dive into it in more detail. And we will all the links are here as well, but all the engagement narratives for anyone that is interested in reading them are publicly available. The ones that scored high, so unlike the ref where we see everything, we don't necessarily know the scores for each one per se, but they only publish the ones that the narratives that scored the highest marks. So again, from my side, just the only other frame of reference in terms of an assessment use case and scenario as to how engagement has been included internationally. The other something that I mentioned was around how we actually look at engagement more broadly and impact. And for those of, if anyone is here from a business school, you may be all too familiar with the business school, the accreditation bodies. And for those of you within the universities, actually, accreditation is another interesting lever that might be useful in terms of your conversations when working with the business schools. Because, and this has been here for a number of years now, we've got impact, and it's something that we've never really dived into much detail, but I wanted to highlight it here because it can be really helpful to support engagement with the academics and the people working in this area. And if you look here, actually, they in their accreditation, it's very much focused on engagement and impact. So again, showing that this is a broader agenda than what we see in terms of assessments. And in particular, there is the standard 9, so this is the AACSB's one, which is around engagement and societal impact. So here we have a really fantastic opportunity to use, again, to use this information in terms of dialogue and actually being aligned in terms of what we're talking about to try and avoid duplication of effort and speak the same language internally to see actually how can we use this information. Do we have potential case studies? What are the examples that they're providing? Because you see here, actually, we have to talk about examples of success. So what are those examples? Could they be a good source for case studies as well and information about what we're doing? The third side that I wanted to talk about was very briefly was around impact in terms of reputation. So I mentioned earlier about the Times Higher Impact ranking. What we see here is that Times Higher conducted a survey of over 2,000 prospective students in 2021. I'm not sure if anyone saw the survey, but the full report is also linked there. So we'll share that report in the chat for you to get their perspectives on sustainability. And 79% of students believe that universities have an important role to play in achieving the SDGs. So whilst we often talk about the phrasing of engagement and impact, the rationale behind it is often is to make a difference to society, the environment, and the economy. From our side, and this is always something that's been associated with that view of making the world a better place and the broader sustainability agenda. So at the moment, from what we're observing, or my observation is that there's often a gap internally between the sustainability side of the university and the engagement and impact teams as well. And that's something that maybe is becoming more joined up because of things like the ranking, where we actually help to identify or bridge the gap of actually impact from a holistic university perspective, where we develop this theory of change, and we're looking at 4 core components, very much focused like internal. So, recognizing that all universities are large employers of people. So actually how they operate makes a difference, their research, teaching, and then the outreach is where I think there's a nice overlay as well. So the information required here is actually how you're engaging, how is that expertise, knowledge infiltrating into the community as well and having benefits beyond the university as well. So actually coordinating whoever's pulling this information together. Again, there's some nice potential alignment opportunities to support each other within that. And the final piece is around annual impact reporting. And there has been annual reporting for compliance requirement in the UK context through, in my view, from the HEBC, and with the introduction of engagement in the ref, we're increasingly looking at indicators and where data may come from in terms of that engagement side of things. So if anyone, again, from impact teams, if you're not familiar with this, there's this table 5, which is not hugely detailed. I'm sure anyone in the public engagement side who is working on this, I'm sure, can go into great lengths about how this information has to come into being. But I'm interested to pose a question of actually, is this, again, another area where actually we can sort of help each other to curate this information? Because we understand it's quite a laborious process. and how this could be helpful, again, from a ref perspective, to have sight and understand the sources of engagement activities and where possible case studies could also be coming from, to support between the internal teams as well. So I'd love to hear again if there are any examples of people doing this. And then finally, to wrap up on annual reporting, is how does this data get repurposed into communicating for prospective students, boards, and students to navigate? And we see examples of universities talking about their impact in sustainability reports. So these should be communicating how the university is delivering on its mission and strategic plan, which is a really exciting opportunity that we're increasingly seeing universities do. So engagement and impact data can be used now. And so in terms of supporting that momentum, it's not just about waiting, from our side, there's opportunities to support that momentum outside of REF 2029 and understand that progress towards the university's objectives. When it comes to reporting, we see universities are raising the bar. We see many examples from around the world in terms of this style. We saw Manchester at the World Academic Summit a couple of weeks ago. For example, that in Australia, and University of Newcastle, Sydney are doing Western Sydney are doing interesting things. Universities are profiling and celebrating impact because they recognize it's part of managing their reputation, attracting students, and building trust within the communities. So from our side is actually how can we use this as a drive? How can we use driving forces such as REF to support better internal collaboration and coordination so that efforts can build a wave rather than creating lots of extra work as well. And so actually what we see as an opportunity is a more of a joined up approach to embedding this as part of business as usual. So part of it is actually how can we really build a culture for engagement and impact to flourish for both internal and external stakeholders to value that research and impact and understand it's here to stay. How do we succeed in this new climate and celebrate impact as part of our business as usual? So thank you for those concluding thoughts from my side. So I have hopefully shared some insights and provoking ideas that will be useful to take away and what we'd like into these panel sessions that we have now. So I'd like to dive into panel one immediately and would like to welcome this panel and invite you to share your videos, and we'll go through introductions to kick us off. So in terms of panel one, we're going to be starting, and I'd love to welcome Carlos Galan-Diaz to the session. We have Audrey Tanner as well as Emily Walker-Williams. So thank you very much for joining us at this symposium. It's great to see you all again. Would you like to start off by introducing yourselves very much formally? If I can come to you first, Carlos.
Good morning, Laura, audience. My name is Carlos Galan-Diaz. Until very recently, I was the acting director of Research and Innovation Services at the University of St. Andrews. Part of my duties was the submission of REF 2021. And as of next Monday, I'll be joining Laura and the Hive team as Impact Consultant. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. And Audrey, love to come to you.
Hi, my name is Audrey. Just a correction on the screen. I am not formally the acting director. I think that would have been there for Carlos. So my role is head of public engagement at Queen Mary University of London. I just took up the role in August, and prior to that, I was still working at Queen Mary, but I was the policy partnerships manager with the Malland Institute. So I was working across policy engagement. So I've switched direction slightly, and I'm working now in the public engagement space, but I've spent a long time working across public and policy engagement in various higher education settings.
Great, thank you, Audrey. And Emily?
Hi, everyone. Emily Walker-Williams. I'm one of the impact officers at LJMU, along with my colleague Lucy Day. I've been at LJMU for 2 years now. I know I don't look old enough, but I've been in for 3 years. In 2023, we appointed our first ever public engagement officer. That's Gemma Reed, and the 3 of us make up the impact and engagement team. We've been working really hard to try and build the impact engagement culture at LJMU, and we're really focused on building high quality impact and engagement. So we're not very ref focused. Obviously, we want to do well in the ref, but our focus is all about building that engagement culture. So we've been doing lots of work around that, lots of workshops. We have a monthly newsletter. We've got an impact hub. We've made impact films. We've got an impact story working group. So it's about impact stories, not impact case studies. We've been building identity with lots of merchandise, and, even having our own team logo, and trying to celebrate success with funding calls and awards, and to support staff with conferment. LJMU is a large teaching university. We're a post 92. Although we are very teaching focused, we do have an research environment, and we've got around 1,300 academic staff and over 28,000 students. So we are quite a big university.
Great, thank you very much. And I guess on that, maybe that's a great place to start actually, about what we're taught. What are the differences? What does engagement mean to you and your roles you mentioned there? Maybe I'm going to come to you first, just to build on what you were just saying about how that team has grown. You've incorporated someone specifically on engagement, but yeah, how does the team work together? What does it mean? Yeah.
It's been really brilliant having Gemma on our team. So Gemma sits with Research and Innovation Services and Impact and Engagement team. I think it's quite unusual. I think a lot of places have a public engagement officer at, city comms or in corporate social responsibility. It's great that we're really closely together. It means that, we can share best practice, learn a lot about each other's roles. And that's been for us to work collaboratively with the team, so for developing those, resources for our staff to make sure that we can support them. So for us, engage a real focus. So in I think it was 2022, we had an external consultant called Lisa Jameson who undertook engagement at LJMU. And what she found was that there was a lot of really great public engagement work happening at LJMU, and there was a real passion for it, but it wasn't really sufficiently supported by providing expertise. We didn't really have the resource or the strategic direction, especially for the senior leadership team. So she came up with a 9-point action plan, and one of them was to create within professional service to support public engagement, which was really, really beneficial for us. And I was really revolutionized the engagement culture at LJ, and it does feel like there's been a fundamental shift in research culture, which is obviously an effect for impact as a result of that.
It's really interesting. Maybe Audrey, come to you.
Yeah, it's really, excuse me, interesting sitting on this panel, hearing about how engagement is sort of structurally set up across the different universities. So at Queen Mary University, though we are a Russell Group university, we do try and have a really local, inclusive approach to the work that we do. So the Center of Public Engagement, which I lead, has been around since, I think, over 10 years now. So it does sit centrally, but it works across all of the university. We do work quite closely with the impact team, even though we are in separate directorates. And the whole ethos behind what we do within the Center of Public Engagement is to reach out to the local East London communities, which is traditionally quite an economically and socially deprived area. So trying to be sort of an anchor institution within the area, working with local communities, community organizations, to be able to make sure that underrepresented groups of people who are less often represented in research or from these benefits are actually able to gain and benefit from the research that's publicly funded. So within our team, we've got it structured through community engagement and public engagement roles. So the community engagement officer is really focused on building those relationships and brokering relationships between the university and local officers, local community groups. And then the public engagement roles are around building those skills within the university to be doing really good engagement. And the whole ethos is really around engaging with the local community in East London to enrich both our research, but also to be able to hopefully benefit and create some societal good with the local area as well.
I think it's really interesting to hear. Maybe Carl, so you could share from what your experience has been.
Thank you, colleagues. Yeah, I mean, at St Andrews, what we built over the 6 years that I was there was a very comprehensive structure where we put in a head of engagement with research post to work closely with our head of research impact and our corporate communications teams. And this proved to be very, very useful because you could catch the cradle to grave research life cycle from different angles. And more recently, before my departure, we started to work more with the philanthropy and the alumni to actually start catching that end of the piece that often universities tend to forget they have. I think that every university works differently. For example, St. Andrews has 21 schools or departments. Each of them have a director of impact and innovation, which is a champion that allows us to pass on the message. And I think that's something that Hive does as well. You find a point of entry and then you use those people to help you pass on the learning and the experience. I think each institution has to do what works best for them. Not one formula is panacea, but the theme that I keep listening to is communication, dialogue, and interaction. And I think that's what we mustn't forget, because the engagement piece is the pathway to achieving something.
Yeah, thank you. And do you have what are the panel's thoughts, I guess, in terms of why engagement has been incorporated into REF in this sort of very specific way, versus compared to previous rounds? Any thoughts or comments?
And I'm happy to contribute a thought on that one. I think what we saw in the last two REFs is a rather large amount of engagement activities that were simply noted without accurate description of what those were. So I think that the REF team got savvy to this and thought, actually, we're missing an opportunity here. And some of these things appear without a clear description or a clear pathway to the impact. On the one hand. On the other hand, I think it's an opportunity for those people who may not have that actual piece of information to justify or demonstrate impact, to demonstrate sustained engagement, which is equally important, because oftentimes that's going to take 10, 15 years of engaging before you can have a tangible benefit. And I think that is the two-prong approach that they took for this, but it's just a wild speculation.
Yeah, and I guess this might be hearsay and speculation as well. I spoke with some colleagues about this, and we thought there might be structural motivations behind it as well, including like the open research agenda, aligning with that more, and also hearing rumors that they might be looking to roll some of CAF elements into REF. So opening up REF to be looking at engagement would sort of allow that flow in. But again, I don't want to be spreading rumors. Those are kind of just internally what our suspicions are within Queen Mary.
Yeah.
If anyone from REF is on this call, it'd be if you know, you can put it in the chat.
Yeah. No, it's always interesting. I don't know if Emily, if there's anything you want to share from your side.
I'd like to think as well that they want to, like Carlos mentioned, have that recognition for, good quality engagement as well, and to have that focus on, that emphasis on how we engage ethically, how we engage with care, and, as Audrey mentioned about, with our local communities, how we engage, not having that kind of parachuting style engagement, and, having that sustainable long-term engagement with us. So I'm hoping that's a focus as well, and reasons why it's been highlighted in the next REF.
And just sort of on this, I think this phrasing of sustained engagement is great to come out from this panel as well. I mean, from your own experiences and what you're seeing with the projects being run and the way that your areas are running engagement, I guess, are there any particular examples or of sustained engagement? We heard that we know it takes a long time potentially. Any good practices or things that you would like to share, or what does sustained engagement mean, I guess, within your own context and the localities in which you operate, I guess?
One of the things been about training our staff is, we need to impact, you still have a lot of misunderstanding about what public engagement can involve. I think a lot of researchers do see it as kind of a dissemination piece at the research project, and we're trying to teach them how to build in from the start. So can create these sustainable relationships. And LJMU is always proud of itself on being this modern university, and we were like, well, what does it mean in reality? It's about our people and how we work with our communities. And one of the things Gemma has created, she came to LJMU, was she created the Engage program with the ACA, and that's been a brilliant project. So it's a 5-month-long program to embed engagement based work. 21 participants from PGRs up to professors, having a mix of face online workshop and face-to-face and online workshops, and they were delivered by the CCPA, yeah, that's right. And that really had a huge impact, you know, just having that in that training for our research. One of them at the end of the program called it transformation life-changing, which is just amazing, and really valuing that investment in public engagement. But yeah, I think about teaching them how to have those relationships for the long term.
Building off of what Emily said in terms of you don't want people just flying in and being very extractive, for us, the sustained engagement really looks like that the elements of mutually respectful relationships and mutually beneficial relationships. So a couple of years ago, the CPE, prior to my time, developed with the NCIA a toolkit for developing equitable partnerships, because that's something that's really, really important within the university. And when researchers are engaging with the local community, that it isn't extractive, that there is benefit, that it's not just, the benefits aren't just coming back to the university, but the communities that we're working with either have skills development, they get credited in publications and outputs, and just seeing what ways that we can actually give back to them as well. And so with we administer a lot of public engagement funding through small grants, large grants, and for participatory research as well. But sort of the key criteria there is that the projects are able to articulate the element of mutual benefit. And so that's something that we're trying to promote across the university. We will help fund your projects, but you need to demonstrate that it's that two-way street. And so we have had projects that we funded over a number of years that have had really good engagement. But the thing that we've seen that it isn't just the money, it also takes the time and the resources and the emotional energy to do that work as well, which can sometimes be challenging because lecturers and professors are pulled in so many different ways, especially with teaching commitments. So even though we do have the money in place, which helps with the sustained engagement, people also need to be able to have the time, and sometimes time is money. So that's something that we're still working on. So if anyone has other ideas about how you can get more time buyouts and give people more of the time allowances to do this work, I'd be happy to hear that.
Well, there's a comment in the chat actually from Peter. So thank you for sharing that they're actually using the Queen Mary evaluation toolkit for measuring their impact engagement activities. I'm not sure if that's the same as that NCIA that you reference.
That's amazing. Yeah, so there's actually two toolkits. So there's the NCIA Building Equitable Partnerships toolkit, but then the team also developed an evaluation toolkit, because often sort of this public engagement work can be a bit of a black box in terms of evaluation. So there's some tools in there. So that's really great feedback to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. And Carl, anything from Carlos you'd like to add?
I think just a very quick comment. I think that the basis of the engagement piece with any audience or public is about respectful engagement. And one of the things that I have spent most of my career on is advising people that every engagement piece can be different, and people can dictate how they engage, as long as it's clear, it's respectful, you know the boundaries of that engagement. I think you can sustain it. So some engagement pieces will be limited to those interactions, but some of those can spill out of that interaction. You can become acquaintances, you can become friends. But it's important to be aware that that is happening. And as long as we can support that awareness and those boundaries on how that relationship is happening, we can build sustainable engagement that is respectful to both parties.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a definite theme around training capacity and mutually beneficial. And that probably is part of an awareness piece, I guess, internally, and training probably comes into that, so people understand how to do it as well within those considerations, which is really interesting. And I've just seen, I think just picking on your point about, there's a point earlier about the potential merging, with the CARE and this alignment actually of understanding internally. How well do you think engagement and what it's an impact are understood across the different parts of the organization, and how well is that discussion, I guess, happening and taking place, and sort of building on that idea in reality?
Well, I mean, I have some thoughts. I think we're still in the nascent stages of the understanding of these things, institutionally speaking, across the piece. Of course, there are better understandings in some organizations. I once did, when we met, Laura, many years ago, I did the EDGE public engagement tool adapted to impact at an ARMA conference. The paper is there in the LSE impact blog, and I don't think we have moved on much from that, because we have a huge flux of people coming in and out of academia. We have management structures that change. So I think it's a constant relearning of what we're trying to do. And then, of course, government come and changes priorities or tries to change them, and we have to relearn how we communicate, understand, and relearn these concepts. But I think the fundamentals haven't changed that much. It's more about creating that general awareness and understanding and buy-in from institutions, so we can champion the same frameworks and concepts and ways of doing things.
Yeah.
I think for us, it's been about building the impact and engagement culture, and for a lot of people, and it's hard, isn't it? The challenge is that researchers, they're so pressured, they're trying to do their teaching, do their research, they've got pastoral care duties, to balance home and work life, and sometimes if you want to talk to someone about impact or engagement, they kind of roll their eyes and think, oh, not another thing that I have to do, or have to try and spread my already split time even further. But when they can see the benefits for, I think then can be a bit of a carrot on the stick. So we've implemented a whole range of workshops, and by trying to kind of be a bit in your face with impact and engagement, so like we had our big merchandise blitz where we made sure everyone had our impact and engagement water bottles and colours and and cups and things, and having that brand identity and making sure that we were celebrating their research, and that we were about, this is how your research is having impact, how your research, your engagement is making an impact, and celebrating that in our newsletters and on social media sites, and making sure that we were saying, yeah, please nominate yourselves for awards, we want to celebrate this engagement. So I think reward and recognition is a big part of how you can bring people along. And I think the ref changes around engagement didn't make a difference for us, because we were already on the path to wanting to build a better engagement culture anyway. We were already engaging with the NCCP 10-print guide and had built our strategy around that, ref then cited that. But I think what that change has meant is that people are more enthusiastic, because they think, oh, it's important for ref, it should be important to me too. So I think that kind of has helped people a little bit more enthusiastic about engaging with engagement and impact.
And to just jump in, very similar to what Emily has said, I think the reward and recognition has been really important. So the Queen Mary has Research and Innovation Awards where people can nominate or self-nominate to different engagement categories. Within the Center for Public Engagement, we're starting public engagement champions, so just featuring people, champions within our newsletters and putting profiles up on our website. But also structurally and systemically within the university, the team has worked with HR to build public engagement or engagement work as a recognition point within the academic careers progression framework. So that is not just based off of how many your publications, people can be recognized for their progression based off of their engagement work as well. Because it needs to be recognized that really good engagement work takes a lot of time And if you can't prioritize both publications and doing good engagement, because both just take so much time. So now being able to have the option of putting more time into engagement, I hope is helping people. There was one question that had been sent to the host, which I think ties into this, which was just about how can you assist scholars in sort of arts and humanities subjects to be more involved with public engagement, because sometimes there are fewer opportunities or less sort of impetus for people to do that. So just within Queen Mary, within our humanities and social sciences faculties, some of the departments have started creating impact fellowship roles, and so that academics actually get buyout time within their academic year to do engagement. So this way it's giving people the time and space to do the engagement work. Within the CPE as well, we encourage people within arts and humanities to take part in things like the Being Human Festival. We actually provide grants for people to take part in the festival as well, because we do recognize that there might not be as many obvious ways for people in arts and humanities to be doing public engagement work. You can't just go to a school and do some fun science experiments and blow some things up. But we're trying to find sort of the existing platforms and then encouraging people and providing money for people to go and do sort of some of the sort of taking the first steps in public engagement work.
Great. And I think, Emily, I remember seeing it at an arms conference about LGMU and the recognition pathway as well. Perhaps would you like to sort of share a bit more about that formal process for reward and recognition as well? And
yeah, so we do now have the engaged scholar route at LGMU. There are 3 pathways to conferment now. You're going for readership or professorship. You've got your, usual pathways for research and teaching, but we also have the engaged scholar route, which is kind of like the impact and engagement route. So it's great to have seen professors promoted through that way now. So again, that also, demonstrating the value of impact and engagement, that it is valued, it is a route to action as well. And again, our team helped to support people who are submitting their application, helping them to come up with the data and to submit those applications. That's been really well received as well, because people have really valued having that extra route to action.
Yeah. And sort of on this arts and humanities side, I'm not sure if anyone would like to, Carlos, Emily, you'd like to dive into that in a bit more detail. So there is a question here, which is, how can you assist scholars in the arts, humanities, or language who may have lesser engagement activities compared to those in sciences, medicine, engineering, with conducting the research impact exercise?
For us, we've been trying to really kind of showcase great stories. So, for example, we've got a researcher called Lise, who did this wonderful creative arts-based project around war widows, and she created this wonderful quilt where the war widows created their own patchwork quilt, and it told their own personal stories of loss. And it goes back to what we were saying about, two-way benefit for our participants. So for those widows, they really felt that they'd been given a the first time. When we hear stories of conflict or war, it's the stories of men, it's the stories of the soldiers, it's the stories of the politicians, and this the first time given a story to those who were left behind, and the widows were able to feel that they to build a community and have a voice, showcasing those really great engagement projects, and that were arts and culture based, is showing other researchers what they can achieve with public engagement through the research. So I think being able to showcase that kind of excellent research is really beneficial.
I'll add that in terms of this particular question, I've always challenged it because I don't think we're in any different arena with any discipline. What we have is a lack of innovation and imagination on how to do those things. For example, at St. Andrews, I had an anthropologist who was interested in weaving baskets. and through the conversations with the different specialists in the professional services. And her own initiative, she ended up working with a mathematician because the mathematician saw that there were fractals theory that could be applied to weaving patterns. This was then later picked up by a random GP that was in a meeting that thought actually we could use weaving of baskets to help people with neural diseases to recover cognitive abilities. And before you know it, you have an impact case study and a way of changing something for better in society, individuals, health, treatments. I think for as long as we think that one discipline or area is less served than another ones, we're going to perpetuate this problem. What we need is to think, okay, dissemination is one aspect, engagement is another aspect. How do we evidence that to get to the impact piece that is the outcome that we're trying to achieve? It's going to take time, but we have to help brainstorm those aspects at the early stages so that the opportunities and possibilities are always open. And I think it is possible. You cannot win them all. I think that if we had a large component of STEM people in this room, they would tell you that it's equally difficult, that it's not really easy to do it. But yes, they have an object which is easier to shine rather than engage with a concept or a practice. But I think both are doable.
Interesting. Emily or Audrey, would you like to add anything to that from your side? I think it's really interesting because and how do we, I think it's back to that, it sort of ties in nicely then with that recognition piece of how do we provide what Audrey you mentioned earlier, how do we provide time and enable people to do this, even to think about it. It's something that we find is actually just have time and space to do so. I'd be interested from people who are actually attending, actually how many of the universities have got a career pathway for recognizing engagement and impact formally. We've seen it a lot in places like Australia is a big topic, and in the UK, it's increasingly, I think in the last year or so in particular, we've seen this coming through. But if anyone is up for would like to share, it'd be really interesting to get more perspectives on that and how much or because it requires quite a lot of substantial organizational change from a very practical perspective to make that happen. So it'd be interesting to see how many people have done this. And I think, yeah, so it'd be really interesting to see that. And I guess sort of on that point, do you think that the expectations are changing around engagement activity? Is it more that we're actually just providing space and recognition, or do you think there are generally within, because I guess more expectations around this area and what's possible because people have more ideas and inspiration perhaps. Has the status quo been changing over time as part of that? In terms of the sorts of engagement activity that can be happening within within the universities, and is it being incorporated as part of university strategies? So yeah, sort of what's the expectation?
I think it is at LGMU. I think it's a lot more broader than in the past. It was always engagement and impact are for ref and specifically for ref, and it was little niche group of people who developed in studies, and they were some few who did the impact. And I think now it's a lot broader, so it's feeding into our strategic goals as a university. So at that leadership level, as we've just appointed our a new Pro Vice Chancellor and partnership as well. It's a brand new role that's been created. And again, I think, engagement piece is going to speak to that a lot. Other agendas like, the Times Higher Impact Rankings and the Sustainable Goals, it's definitely broadening out and into other areas, to see where an impact, having our estates report on their impact and their sustainability, our teams, all different aspects of the university. So I think it is broadening out from just being seen as, an activity for ref.
Yeah, at Queen Mary, we have a vice vice principal for policy and strategic partnerships, and under that, that's where my team sits, the Center for Public Engagement, but we sit with a number of different engagement teams as well, the civic engagement team. There's also Center for Creative Collaboration. So all these different teams that are working together to do community engagement and public engagement work sit centrally. And it is one of the core arms of sort of the university's delivery strategy. However, the main institutional strategy, which is Strategy 2030, still focuses on research, basically across research and student experience. And there isn't a sort of a core explicit section on engagement. It's kind of woven through little parts. So no changes have made yet as a result of REF, but I am wondering when we go through a strategy refresh, whether that element around engagement will be more explicitly stated, and I hope it is.
Interesting. I'd love to hear more about how those, as well, before I invite Carlos as well to comment, how those different teams, or how do you coordinate as well amongst within the university as well? It's really fascinating as a model.
Did you want me to expand on that?
Yes, if you could expand. I think it's quite, from my side, it's quite unusual. It's quite interesting. It's not common from my perspective. So I'd love to hear a bit more.
Yeah, so we've got sort of two sort of governing groups. There's the Research Impact Board and the Knowledge Exchange Board. So the Research Impact Board focuses on more of like sort of the REF things, what feeds into REF, how can we get all of these different engagement teams working together with research impact so that we have pipelines that feed in. Knowledge exchange takes a look at it a little bit more broadly. So that includes both the business development teams, the innovation team, looking at consultancies and spinouts, as well as the engagement teams. And that looks around at the funding that we do have, the sort of how things are funded, the delineation between the teams, but how we can promote knowledge exchange across the piece so that every academic, every school and department knows that they do have the opportunity to go out beyond academia with the work that they're doing. And we do have sort of business development officers for each of the faculties, including arts and humanities, who are specialized in knowledge translation, including in arts and humanities. So how do you create social enterprises and social ventures out of, as Carlos had described, a concept and not just a product?
Great. Really insightful. Carlos.
Yeah, I think this is a really topical issue because we are again at the mercy of the measurement and the pathway to the measurement and whether it exists formally in an institution before we can recognize it and reward it. I think that as long as it's embedded, you have an easier road trip to get to that. And that is one challenge. How do we formalize structures in universities? That is a huge component of the higher education sector, because you could have a whole department or a whole section of a university doing excellent engagement and excellent impact. But if it's not rewarded, you can potentially disincentivize those people. And if you reward them, you may disincentivize the ones that are not doing it. So I think we still have a long way to go on understanding proper matrix management style and how we reward different skills and different activities at universities and how the cumulative effect of those creates success. Not that ticking all the boxes creates success. It's how do we reward excellence when it happens and we grow it together. And I think that's one of our challenges, and we have to crack that. Because not everyone can be good at everything. You can be good at the baseline, but you will excel at a few things unless you're truly exceptional, which is not the vast majority of us.
Yeah, great. It's a great note to, I guess, invite you all to share some closing comments and remarks. So thank you very much to the panel. It's been really, really interesting to hear the observations, and perhaps in those closing remarks, you could add just a sentence basically about your observations, and particularly around what you're planning, maybe something about the future, if you'd like to incorporate, like what are you planning or looking to do going forwards in terms of engagement and reporting. And maybe we'll start off. Who'd like to go first? Just as a way of bringing the session to a close, but let's talk about the future. What does the future hold from your view? Maybe.
I don't mind going first. For the future, we'd love to get the rep guidance. You know, from a personal perspective, you know, just in terms of that ref prep. I know we've been talking a lot about, you know, not being focused on ref, but it is there looming, and we'd love to have that actual guidance, because that is one of the challenges when we're getting staff saying to us, "What does rigor mean? Tell us, we want to know." And yeah, we'd like ref to tell us first, and then we'll tell you. And you know, we are a small team, and you know, we're going to have at least 60 impact case studies to develop. So but what I'm loving is how much staff are really engaging with us, and you know, just following on from what Carlos has just said, it's hard for me because I'm always like, oh, you've got so much impact with your research, and I do have to remind myself that impact is not for everyone, and not everyone has to do impact or engagement. But because I'm so enthusiastic, I'm always like, oh yeah, you've got to do impact. You know, so that is something to remind myself of. I think it's lovely to see that there's been such a good investment from our last ref. You know, we had one impact officer, one research excellence manager, and it was just the two of them for the whole university. And now that we've got, and now there's two of us. I know it's not a lot compared to some of you who've got, you know, an impact officer in every faculty or every school. But you know, we have had some investment in the team, and it's great to see that we are you know, having those processes for reward and recognition, and able to you know, celebrate people's research and the impact that they're doing. So one of the things we're doing for the future is we've created this impact stories template. So not focusing on impact case studies, but wanting to know what impact people are doing across the university, and how they're engaging with their communities. And we're using this template to collate, you know, the activity that's going on, so we can map it across the university, and we can see where there are synergies, where there's opportunity for interdisciplinary collaboration. And we've got working groups for each of the faculties that are then going to oversee all the templates that come back, and then we're going to have all of those groups meet together so we can discuss, you know, where we can work together more closely. So I think that's quite an exciting initiative that we're excited to kind of see how that develops over the next few months.
I'm happy to go ahead. And thank you, Emily, for your final thoughts and closing thoughts there. Something that I wanted to sort of wrap things up with was that Carlos had mentioned that we're working within a political context, and I think everyone's waiting for the budget to come out next week with bated breath, because funding is a massive issue across the higher education sector right now. There's a lot of pressures on HIFE, the Higher Education Impact Fund, and we don't know for certain what the next HIFE round is going to look like, and what sort of the priorities within HIFE are going to be. So right now, at least within Queen Mary, the engagement teams are facing massive financial pressures, as well as hiring and recruitment freezes. So someone in the chat had mentioned about the pressures that engagement and increase in pressure on engagement looks like for professional services staff. So if we're now operating in an environment where there are financial pressures, hiring and recruitment freezes, but being asked to do more work that involves, it just takes more resources and time to do really good engagement work. I do feel like there is a little bit of an issue around sort of sustainability within the sector now for doing this work, and we don't want people burning out, because, you know, having two people at LJMU for the last ref round managing all of that isn't enough. But now, if there's even more and more pressure to do all of this great engagement work, it's going to be really hard if teams are actually shrinking. Also, I think it's really great that more and more people are coming forward because of ref who want to do engagement now. But it's really important that we harness that excitement and motivation with some training and capacity building as well, because we have seen instances where people are really excited, they go out to the communities, but it's extractive, there isn't mutual benefit, and now the community groups are coming back and saying, well, we don't want to work with this university because all they do is parachute in and out. So we have to be sure that we're both harnessing and leveraging that the excitement for engagement with sort of not gatekeeping, but making sure that people have the right principles around good engagement practice when they're going into the communities, so that we can see really great things like the War Widow quilts and the basket weaving that Carlos had mentioned.
I'll keep it very brief. For me, one of the really exciting parts is understanding and becoming proficient with Hive at the measuring and reporting of the databases that contain the examples of impact activities and engagement. For me, that has been always one of the weakest points of working with the community. There is a lot of great work, but a lot of gaps in how we track those things. And I think that is crucial. That helps us create efficiencies and savings in terms of how we maximize the use of those examples. We cross-pollinate activities, and we can use that to tip off different people working on similar areas. I have done some of that, but I'm looking forward to using a state-of-the-art system.
Great. Well, thank you very much for those concluding thoughts. It's been a really fantastic discussion. We've learned a lot through it, so thank you. There is one question outstanding in the Q&A section. So if I'll just invite the panelists, once we wrap up the session, if you're able to have a look in the Q&A and would like to provide a response, that would be, I'm sure, very much appreciated to Jen. So huge thank you to the panelists for this, and we'll move on to the next panel session, and I'll pass over to my colleague Alex. But thank you so much for sharing so openly. It really was very insightful. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you everyone. Thanks, Laura. So we're going to invite the next panel to turn on your cameras and we'll crack on. Great, thank you everyone. So the next panel, I'll keep this brief because I know we're slightly over. This panel 2, practical considerations for REF preparation, doing more with less and not doing less with more as it might have been billed before. I can just welcome the objectives of this panel. We're just going to look at a few different perspectives from 3 different universities, see how they are managing to prepare for REF and for impact and engagement with the resources that they have. Look at some best practice examples of what's worked and maybe what hasn't, and then leave everyone with some practical approaches that might well apply to your own institution. So if I can just invite Anne-Marie to introduce yourself, please.
Hello. Hi. Yes. My name is Anne-Marie Green, and I suppose in some respects I'm just an ordinary research and teaching academic in some respects. Professor of Work and Diversity, and then I hold this leadership role, Director of Research Impact at the School for Business and Society at the University of York. And so I don't really have much of an idea about what's going on wider than my own remit, which is circa 200 research active staff, over 2 REF units of assessment, 17 and 20, and we'll probably need around 10 to 12 cases for REF 2029. So that's really my focus at the moment.
Right, okay. Jackie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, it's lovely to be here today. I'm Jackie Reynolds. I'm the Research Impact Manager and Associate Professor at the University of Staffordshire, and I've been the inaugural and only Research Impact Manager at Staff since I started there in 2018, and prior to that I had 12 years on academic contracts undertaking impactful research, and was part of a department at Staffs called the Creative Communities Unit, which was established in 2002 and was very actively doing engagement from then. So I think sometimes engagement is something that has actually been happening for quite a long time in different settings, but perhaps REF puts a kind of a different light on it.
Right, okay, thank you. Finally, Jean.
Hi everyone, nice to be here as well, and me too. Apologies for the earphones, but I have a very noisy student cohort around me in my secure little cubicle, so I'm trying to mitigate for that. From the University of Greenwich, the Impact Framework Manager. The university has 4 faculties ranging from engineering and science, education, health and human sciences, liberal arts and sciences, and a business school. So we centrally support anything to do with effectively engagement, as it's now called, pathways to impact, as it was called, knowledge exchange, as it also is, as well as impact for the entire university. So everything from shape to STEM and back again. Yes, I think that's enough from me.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for being here. So I just wanted to start with, so Jackie, you mentioned that engagement's been going on for a long time. So has there been any movement within Staffordshire to focus that towards REF currently?
I think I'd agree with the kind of the points that people are making in terms of that the REF focus on engagement hasn't necessarily changed engagement. I think there are people who have been doing engagement for a very long time. It's very much embedded in the way that I train people around impact, you know, around kind of stakeholder analysis and how to involve people, how to effectively involve people. And so I think if there's been a kind of a change in how it is, I think it's more, it helps me in a way to kind of emphasize the inclusivity that including engagement in REF offers, that this kind of idea that it's not just the star kind of case studies, that other kind of activities will also be able to be included through the impact and engagement evidence statements. Obviously, we don't know exactly how, or you know, how we're going to be able to include that, but I do often use it to encourage people to say that this will now be able to hopefully be able to form part of our REF submission, so they'll be able to get that kind of recognition for it, for the work that they're doing.
Okay, great. And Anne-Marie, from your perspective, I know you said your remit's fairly limited in terms of impact. Has engagement touched on there much? Are you expecting it to?
Yeah, definitely. And I think we've, in terms of leadership roles, we have someone who's my counterpart for engagement. So we've actually split impacted engagement, because within the school, which is a legacy merger of the School of Management and the School of Social Policy and Social Work, we actually have a lot of policy active research staff who've been doing that kind of engagement activity for a long time. Now, the thing is about trying to translate that into what we might consider to be measurable change and that impact. So that's really the piece that I'm working with at the moment. I suppose it definitely, I feel REF pressure for sure, and that is suddenly ramping up after definitely a real period of inertia where I felt quite frustrated in my inability to get going on things. And I really didn't want to be in the position which I was at a previous institution where we were scrabbling around at the last minute for impact case studies, and I wanted to be on top of things. And I've kind of felt that inertia at faculty and university level has kind of hampered me somewhat. I guess I welcome the changes in the new REF. Well, let's see the final guidance, but the wider remit of capturing wider engagement and impact activity within the environment statement seems to me to be a very positive thing, allowing us to capture a much wider the things that are going on that aren't necessarily going to get to impact case study level, but also allowing people who are engaging in that work that they will get recognition for it, and that then it is valued by the school. So I think that's all quite positive.
Okay, great, thank you. And Jean, from your perspective, how's sort of engagement factoring in at the moment? Has that changed with the announcement?
At Greenwich, I'd say the engagement itself has not changed at all. The process of reaching out, developing relationships, and trying to carve out pathways to impact with partners wherever they are potential impact beneficiaries happens pretty much from the bottom up. Our research is working away on projects that are quite passionate about where their headspace and their energy lies, and they're very strongly driven, I think, from that place, a real place of passion and commitment, and relationships that exist as well. I'd say for me, REF introducing in a sort of a slight detail on what is coming, and then a bit of a deathly silence, or a long silence rather, where just speculation leads to speculation leads to speculation. I think we've all given up on speculating, to be honest. But I think a few things concern me in that I'm worried that in the midst of limited resources and research teams and professional services staff are being really tightly squeezed at the moment in a way I've never seen before, are going to be scrambling around trying to record the engagements that they're having instead of having them. And I think that's potentially a real problem if the emphasis from REF is not on celebrating it and rather scrutinizing it and assessing it in formal terms. And I think the word rigor is quite worrying there. It was an odd choice of word for me with regards to a process of engagement. But, you know, you can define any word with an explanation and then concerns are alleviated, or a plan of action can be developed. But I think that that process of connecting with the people who can use your research, really getting to grips with the value exchange that's taking place there. What are they really getting from the process? What are you getting from the process? To really prevent that parachuting in and out, or mosquito researchers, as they're known in South Africa, I think is crucial to this process, and it always has been. I think engagement is as crucial now. I don't think anything's changed with regards to how important engagement is now in the light of REF to what it was before. It was the process by which impact is generated. So it's pretty much a non-negotiable if you want to have positive change from your research. I think it's about how we tell that story, and how we evidence it, that can go a positive way or a negative way, or a combination of both.
Yeah, okay, great. So I suppose on that point then, it sounds like capturing engagement is going to be one of the main challenges. I mean, is there anything at the moment that you're doing at Greenwich in terms of how you capture that? Is it similar to how you capture impact? Is there anything you can sort of learn from impact capture, do you think, with regards to engagement?
Yeah, I think a sort of there's a precedent for this already in the Hepsis return, isn't there? There's a precedent in what the KEF is. I wouldn't say there's a precedent in the KEF return, but there's a precedent in what goes into the KEF return. Obviously, the Hepsis return, some aspects of HESA, but I'm talking primarily Hepsis. And I think we looked at earlier, Laura actually showed table 5 of the KEF return. And I think what we're looking at potentially, if I have any understanding of this engagement element that means anything to me, we're looking at a vastly expanded table 5 for the kinds of things that would make sense to me if we were to present everything we're doing, give a picture to REF of everything we're doing along the lines of engagement. And there was a list, I think what I found really interesting, and I haven't taken a detailed look at it, but was what Laura shared with us in terms of the Australian templates and their guidance. I think that is something I'm going to be jumping on as soon as I can, because I've battled to think, how are we going to do this? Just logistically within the university, because that means that every researcher, any member on a team who is working on that impact pathway needs to be recording these things somewhere into some system of some kind, maybe many different systems that then need to be sewn together. As I say, a precedent for that is the Hepsis return. It's a process that's already in place. So I can't help but think that I suppose the direct mapping from Hepsis, if not KEF, to REF has already happened. It's going to be what we are going to need to use, because the mechanisms for recording that are the only ones currently in place. And I'm saying that in light of the fact that we're now 3 years into the assessment period of said engagement, and we've yet to find out what we should be recording to evidence. The other thing, one last thing, sorry, I'm aware it's a long answer, but the discipline level evidence statements, that word evidence once again concerns me. Not concerns me, but it sort of makes you, it induces anxiety into the whole scenario, because what that implies is that you're going to be asked to provide exactly something like table 5 in the HEPS test return. Very specific metrics, numbers of people on steering groups of an organization, or a number of policy outreach initiatives, a number of select committee appearances, whatever it might be. And we have not been recording engagement activities on that granular level for the last 3 years. So the broad picture of celebrating processes of engagement is brilliant, but the detail and what we're going to be required to do, I think, is potentially challenging.
Right. Okay. Jackie, from your experience with a long term of engagement, is there anything that you found particularly useful in terms of capturing?
I think that, I mean, I really agree, I have to say, with all the points that John's made. I think he's made some really, really good points there. I do think that the challenge with capturing engagement, apart from, like as John says, that HEPSI return gives you that kind of overarching thing, but otherwise it tends to be a bit inconsistent across the institution, doesn't it, is my observation in the long term. You evaluate things for different reasons, different purposes, different funders, and so on. So getting that kind of consistent evidence capture is really difficult. I know that I've got we have a small team of people at staffs called the Public Engagement and Research Team, who do a lot of the work around our approach to our civic university mission, which is the Connected Communities approach. And they've done some fantastic work actually on trying to get a consistent evaluation across the university around public engagement. And they produced last year, they produced the first kind of Connected Communities impact report. They're currently working on the one for this year. So, you know, that's brilliant work to get that kind of consistency. But of course, whether that's going to be aligned with any kind of ref requirements, we don't know. I would hope that we would be able to use some of what they've done there in the ref, but we shall see. But that is the challenge, really, is the consistency, and also that concern about if we have to, you know, it's already, there are huge challenges around evidencing impact, and if we add another massive challenge on top of that, then in a context of, as people have talked about, you know, severe kind of budget restraints and often the reduction in the workforce and so on, then it's hard to envisage how that's going to happen. And I share that concern that, you know, it becomes too much around the measuring rather than, you know, the recognizing the positive fact that the work is happening. Then, you know, it's there's a limit to how much investment, I think, and time and resource can go into just the evidencing side of things.
Okay, great. And Anne-Marie, from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think it relates a bit to, I think the big struggle for us, and perhaps it's going to going into the next question, so I won't take up too much time now, but it's really the challenges that we're facing with regard to financial constraint and as you say, workforce reductions that are really, I think, negatively impacting on our ability to capture engagement or impact. And is only, for me, it's only going to get worse definitely over the next 18 months. So it's really trying to limit the negative impact, but perhaps we'll come to that later.
Yeah, well,
or I can move on.
Yeah, no, by all means. Well, so I think good point around how are you approaching those challenges at York. So we've mentioned about the resourcing restrictions. We'll come back to those, but yeah, but what's your current approach for managing that, given those kind of challenges?
I'm still trying to get used to the new environment where I've gone from a situation. See, that I think one of our problems at York is that everything is very there's no centralized approach. So every school is doing something different, and then it depends very much on the size and the scope of your school, and then also the resources that you have individually. So everything that I've been able to have as director of impact has been based on what I can persuade SMT to include in the budget or to include in the workload allocation. That there's no direction or remit, perhaps because that's right, it couldn't be centralized because every department is different, but it makes it, there's a lot of variability across the university. So for example, my role is pretty much as Director of Research Impact is well resourced in terms of workload allocation, but I have colleagues that work in other departments who get no workload allocation at all for being Director of Research Impact. So those things are variable. Until last year, I had a really, really good impact budget. So someone needed to go to a policy briefing or needed to go to an APPG or they needed to go do I could just give them the money for that. All of a sudden, we have no PSS staff at all. So I'm just working by myself. I have no PSS support locally supporting research impact. We have no budget. And so the only thing I have is Hive. and I think in some respects, the school is saying, well, we've given you this budget at the time of very strong financial constraints. And so that's going to solve all our issues. That having this impact ecosystem is going to solve everything. And I had managed to get workload allocation. So people would apply across the school for a competitive process to get workload allocation of varying different levels. And that worked really well last year. People found it really beneficial. We had some really good results. And of course, that's been entirely scrapped this year because in the threat of compulsory redundancies, and we just can't maintain that level. So people are having to, and I'm quite worried at this stage about particularly some of those case studies that were really, all they need is a little bit of a push to really make them have great impact that you could capture. I'm worried that they are going to fail because we can't put the sustained investment in. So we're doing the best that we can. So locally, I am regularly meeting with people. I started initiating last year, having twice monthly research impact drop-ins, one Zoom and one face-to-face, where people could just come along and talk to me about anything, bring a funding bid they have or whatever. So it's really been trying to do as much as we can with no money. That's it.
Great. Jackie, so from your side, anything you want to add to that from how Staffordshire is doing on that front?
Yeah, I think very similar in many ways, really. I try to be very proactive in the support that I offer to people. So there's a lot of kind of one-to-one support available. Some people on the call will know that I'm very, very interested in coaching informed approaches to supporting impact. And so I've had initiatives like research impact coaching cohorts and kind of individual and group coaching approaches, trying to get together people at different stages of their impact journey to share their experiences, because again, thinking about the resourcing issue, I'm the only impact manager working across the whole institution, and so building that capacity around people sharing, how to develop a community of practice around impact and people sharing their experiences and so on, and perhaps encouraging and motivating and inspiring each other as well can be really helpful. Really kind of emphasizing trying to embed impact and in the whole kind in people's work, and so the idea being that it's moving away from thinking about it as something extra that they need to do, but that they're kind of thinking about it throughout their research projects and publishing about their impact and so on as well, which kind of helps in terms of focusing on evidence collection as well, and the idea that the impact evidence, the idea that if you embed impact, the evidence collection as part of your research, then you'll constantly be moving in the right direction of sort of demonstrating your impact. So and then like Anne-Marie, we've now got impact leads in the research centres as well, but again, that's kind of has to be fitted in around all their other kind of responsibilities and things. So that's quite challenging, but at least that, you know, I do a train the trainer kind of approach with the impact leads, which kind of increases that kind of institutional knowledge and awareness and capacity as well. So I would say that they are some of the initiatives, and making use also of any kind of small bits of funding that we can get. I mean, I have to say the policy support funding has been invaluable. You know, I'm concerned that I did hear that's, you know, that might not be continuing, but we've actually been able to use that for internal small awards that people have done absolutely phenomenal things with, you know, in a context where you know, where people don't necessarily have access to a lot of funding. If you do get kind of even just a £5,000 award, it's quite remarkable at times what people manage to achieve with that. So that's been a really positive thing for us as well.
Okay, great. And John?
Yeah, I sort of I can't help but feel that things had built on the impacts side of things. Across the sector, things had built such great momentum leading up to the last ref. Obviously, COVID came along, you know, luckily, actually, when it did, right near the end, I suppose. Depends how people were affected, but it sort of came out of that last ref and thought, okay, now we can really start flying. You know, we've made that step change and we can really start flying, and the context that we're all operating in now has come and pretty much squashed that a bit and gone, okay, maybe we'll just walk fast. So there's certain things that I think are sort of a two-pronged approach, I suppose. Anne-Marie mentioned academic workload, and I think to just communicate to people in more senior positions than I'm in, a quite simple algorithm that balances the investment you put into these impact case studies and the return on investment that you'll get off the back of the fact that REF is a competition for money. And based on the vast amounts of money that you got for a 4-star last REF that was quite transparent before we went into it, I mean, it wasn't definitive, but there were quite, I'd say, well evidenced calculations as to what you'd get for a 4-star, 3-star, etc. And we all saw the results of that. The kind of feedback we'll be giving off the back of our mock REF cycles and development of impact case studies for the REF will be sort of two-sided. But the one I'll touch on the first side in a bit, but the key side I'm focusing on here is to communicate to senior management or our research and knowledge exchange board. This is what you will need if you want a 4-star impact case study. You'll need to be allocating the right amount of academic workload points for the person not only to write the impact case study, but to actually generate the impactful work. And I think it was Audrey who highlighted this in the previous panel about the fact that academic workload is not just about time for the work, it's about time for emotional energy, headspace. And for good engagement, you need imagination, you need creativity, you need, actually, probably most importantly, you need the time to have those conversations or engagements with your beneficiaries to really get to grips with what is the key value offering that you're providing them. Why are you interested? Why are they interested in your research? Why is there uptake in your research, etc.? So I think lobbying really upwards in terms of having an intelligent kind of informed return on investment kind of conversation about the impact case studies that you're focusing on developing. But the other side, which to me is far more important, and these are the two sides of any impact case study review session or feedback that I have with any of our researchers, is the actual impact work itself, which is well wider than REF, far more important than REF's window on it. And to make that clear to those researchers that when we're reviewing impact case studies, we're not trying to step on the passion and enthusiasm that goes into the impact. We're just casting a certain window on it for a specific function, and those get triaged off in one direction. But what's actually really important of that meeting is really providing the kind of really trying to inspire the researchers in that kind of coaching fashion that Jackie talked about, that gives them the energy, I suppose, to carry on in constrained circumstances. Another thing in a tangible way, I think, is I've mentioned it already, is really leveraging off what we're doing already for knowledge exchange, the structures, the teams, the individuals, and the data that's been gathered for things like the HEPSIS return, or albeit viewed through the CAF return. I also think there's a lot to be gained from really trying to join things up more. Audrey talked about how the various places that public engagement happen at QMIL, and to really try and leverage off that work to align activities, potentially between different teams, your partnerships hub or your knowledge exchange manager plus your impact teams, so that you can have a sort of an aligned approach to many activities. And lastly, I just think a system that we're trying to get going at Greenwich is to really have a map, an overview of the relationships that we're building. So this is very much in the engagement territory. It's about, who are all these different researchers that we have engaging with, who are all those organizations, to try and look for some kind of alignments, patterns, etc., to leverage off. Yeah, there's more, but that's what comes to mind at the moment.
Right, okay. Anne-Marie, what are your thoughts on sort of this systematic approach versus perhaps a more people-focused approach?
I think it's interesting to hear. I don't know if other people's experience who are on the call, because we are the only department at the University of York that have Hive, for example. So one of the things is that I indicated before that having had to really battle to get that budget and the limited number of licenses that we have, which really only cover probably the quarter of the staff that we would like it to. I'm really grateful for that system. I mean, without it, I don't think I could do my job properly, because I certainly couldn't have any kind of systematic view over the impact work that's going across the school and really try to support those impact case studies. But as I said, I feel like SMT are kind of feeling like this is going to be the silver bullet that's going to allow them to allow their impact work to progress well towards the ref. And clearly the system can't replace the people, and it's only as good as those people entering the information into the Hive system. And my role has been in trying to encourage them to do that. And it can be a bit of a battle, given that impact work, as John was just saying, is so highly people oriented. And it does necessitate having time and the workload to do that, to network, to follow up contacts, to track and capture evidence, to nurture relationships. And I also am aware that in having a different system to the rest of the university, I'm having to make sure that any returns that we have then link into whatever they decide they're going to be using to capture that impact on a centralized basis. So that system has to interact with others. I mean, so far, the data export and the way that I can link into those systems hasn't been a problem, and certainly the review function, it has been really helpful to me in being able to have a view about what the impact work is across our school, and being able to tell faculty very clearly what's going on, and part of that is having a clear idea about the information, which I think systems can be really helpful in doing. But as it doesn't replace that kind of, I do kind of get that tension and that kind of view that Jean indicated about worries about evidence and with scrutinizing and measuring, which gets away from that kind of inspirational, passion-filled engagement work, which we also need to ensure is continued to be encouraged.
Right, great. And Jackie, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I don't think I've got anything further to add, really. It's very much resonating with me, everything that the other panelists are saying on that. So, yeah.
Well, in which case, I mean, so we've covered these sort of resourcing challenges that you've had. How would are you expecting there to be any sort of resources changes within Staffordshire in the build up to the ref, because of the ref or otherwise? Are you expecting there's going to be any modification? Do you think you'll be able to influence that at all?
as things stand at the moment, I have to say that, like everybody else, we're awaiting sort of political announcements and so on. But I think at the moment, I think things are looking to get harder. So, you know, yeah, that's all I can. Yeah, it's I think that we've had several kind of rounds of restructure and things, and like many institutions being in a similar position over voluntary redundancies and so on, and so there's that kind of overall reduction in capacity, and so it's it's I think it's very challenging times. I think we've heard from various speakers today about the challenges that institutions are facing, and yeah, I would certainly agree with that, and I don't get the sense that there's going to be more more investment forthcoming.
Yeah, okay. So what sort of I think in an ideal world, what sort of support would you need? What thing would most make the biggest difference, do you think, if you had to pick any kind of support area?
I think it's a combination. I mean, it's a predictable response in a way, but I think it is that combination of the funding and the time for people, and that's kind of interlinked, isn't it? Really, that as people have said, it's engagement takes time, impact takes time. It's you've got that kind of passion there that kind of drives people with it, but there are only so many hours in the day, and they do need the time to do that, and also we need sufficient time ourselves and within our teams to be able to provide the necessary support. And I think that's a lot of what I try to do in my role, is to kind of helps to kind of overcome those time constraints, whether that's kind of collecting testimonials for people, whether that's kind of other forms of support around kind of planning and evidencing and so on. It's kind of trying to overcome those time constraints that people face. But yeah, I do think that combination of the funding and the time is really important, and when you have those, then that enables you to then invest in that kind of research and impact culture. When you have the time, you can develop those kind of initiatives. I mean, I'm always very keen to kind of think about new ways to support people. I'm always looking at new opportunities to do that, whether it's in new areas like developing programs of support for knowledge transfer partnerships and so on, which we've had an increase in knowledge transfer partnerships. So you see that as an opportunity to provide additional kind of support around that, and developing the kind of communities of practice and so on. But again, people need time to engage in that. Otherwise, what tends to happen is that you have an initial rush of enthusiasm because people want to connect with the kind of the learning and the sharing and the activities and so on. But then over time, it's difficult to sustain their kind of engagement and to prioritize it when there are so many kind of competing priorities.
Okay, great. Okay, and Jean, your thoughts on sort of, I think one of the points there, Jackie, is around how the research and the research community, well, how do they find time to do all these things?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some practical terms, we have one faculty at the university. I only discovered this recently, but they have their baseline allocation for research. We're not a research-intensive university. We have one research-intensive institute, which is almost entirely research only, but the bulk of the university is teaching and research. So there's obviously the standard allocation for research, and then there's the teaching obligations and all the other obligations. But one of our faculties, for the purposes of, I think, many things, but a key one of which is developing, preparing for REF. This was obviously in the context of developing impact case studies, but they've got a kind of a bidding process. The word struck me as strange at the time. Then I understood what they meant. It's an application process for extra R&KE time, so research and knowledge exchange time, with pretty much provide an argument for why you need that time, what the purpose is, what the aim is, and they'll consider allocating that time. And as we progress along the ref preparation process through the mock refs that would become increasingly a draft impact case study with our quite particular recommendations based on the, weaknesses, gaps, strengths, opportunities analysis of the impact case studies. So that would be the justification for them asking for the extra time. However, in the same meeting, I was reminded that that allocation of that time would have to be offset against these constraints and the basic needs for teaching at the university. So I can see where it's probably going to go. And I think there's a real risk of exploitative practices on our researchers with regards to developing impact case studies for the next ref. Because they really are squashed already, never mind developing impact case studies or the impact for the content to go in the impact case studies. And I can't, it's not like a blame, blaming senior management or even blaming government. The global context we're in is such as it is. I think REF could actually do something here, to be honest, and with my small voice in this call asking REF to do something, but REF were really good when it came to COVID to actually factor in the situation we were all in and actually adjust, be agile to factor in the context that everybody was working in. So I think potentially they could also factor in this. It's quite a unique context I think we're all working in. It's certainly not business as usual, as I knew life before, COVID. And I think particularly for researchers in higher education settings, there's a unique set of constraining circumstances. So I think there could be some kind of forgiveness or allowance or some kind of adjustment to the original aspirations for REF, potentially built into how the framework eventually ends up. I think, but from ourselves, in terms of us having to do the best with what we've got, I think, to be honest, this Jackie, who does a lot of this very actively, this more coaching, mentoring type approach to, I suppose, embedding impact and supporting researchers on impact, I think is a real sort of, sorry for the metaphor, but, killing many birds with one stone kind of approach. It factors in that sort of career-long trajectory, a long time scale that you need for real effective impact generation. It factors in a kind of wider approach than just focusing on the particular research project at hand. It focuses on relationship building. It focuses quite often on getting people to share ideas with each other with that kind of coaching approach. And I think that's actually a really effective way to work with researchers on their careers, to be honest, with impact being the kind of guiding star. And I think that's quite abstract, I know, but to frame training sessions and workshops and initiatives in terms of that kind of approach, I think is the way to go. It's the way that makes sense to me.
Right. Anne-Marie, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I don't. I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I think all the things that Jean said just make absolute sense to me. I am hoping that things will get better, because if they don't, then we really it's going to be very, very difficult to give those impact case studies the support that they need for the rest. So that bit, I mean, I've been told that the workload allocation for our school should be able to come back in the next 18 months. So I'm hoping that will be the case, and that we have kind of optimistic projections that various other parts of time allowance and support will be increased as we get closer to the ref deadline. So I can just remain optimistic.
Okay. Well, so then I think it's time to wrap up the session. So, Jackie, did you have any closing remarks? Just a sentence or so, just to summarize your thoughts.
Unmute. Yeah, it's I think there's just, I think the key things from today, I think the thing I didn't mention in terms of the support that's needed is that we need some guidance. We need to know what we're actually doing, and that's kind of the elephant in the room at these things, because I think we're all working in very, very difficult circumstances, and I think it just adds to it this kind of stress and uncertainty and practical issues over we don't know what information we're going to have to actually collect. And I do think that, you know, there are particular challenges. For example, as a university like us, we don't have a CRIS system, and you know, depending on what kind of information is required, you know, that may have to be collected manually across the university, potentially by one person. You know, I think that then, you know, the resource implications of the decisions over this are really quite huge, and to not even be in a position of being able to plan it at this stage, I think is really quite problematic. So that's, you know, I think that's kind of highlighting I wanted to kind of finish really by highlighting that kind of elephant in the room, really, but just on a more positive note, to kind of recognize the kind of the some of the really inspiring things that I've heard about from other speakers as well, in terms of all of this energy and effort that goes around supporting colleagues, and really that focus on embedding impact throughout and providing that kind of support. I think has always been critical and will always be critical, and I hope that we're able to continue doing that despite the you know, the very difficult circumstances that the sector finds itself in.
Right, thank you very much. Jean?
Yeah, I think just two things, regardless of what rules REF eventually provides us, and the constraints that we're under, etc. I think to just focus on what we've really always focused on, and to be honest, I think it is the winning formula, which is producing transformational research that produces benefits, and uniquely defined benefits for particular groups of people, entities, whether it be community, globally, etc., to really just focus on that, because that is where the energy lies. That's where the magic lies. And the other thing, to end on a positive note, I think the one thing I've seen emerge from this discussion about engagement more, and the potential for celebrating it alongside the impacts that result from it, is new sort of discussions I've been seeing happening on ethical engagement, equitable partnerships. I mean, that's always been something the NCCPE, for example, have addressed directly, but I've seen it creep in a good way into the discussions on impact and engagement, and also the sort of added or enhanced aspect of equality, diversity, and inclusion dimension to what impact already does. And I think those are positive developments from my perspective. Yes, that's it.
Right,
Thanks.
thank you very much. Finally, Anne-Marie.
Oh, yeah, I mean, yeah, to follow Jean, I actually, despite all the resource constraints, I do feel that there, since working in the impact space, say, for about a decade, I definitely feel now, even within a Russell Group university, where our focus has been completely on research publications and on traditional research routes and funding, there is a real wind of change around the importance of impact. And I'm definitely feeling the benefit of that, and people coming to me and wanting to find out about it in a way that just wasn't the case 5 years ago. And I think there is a recognition that those things are important. And while we don't have a promotion track in the same way, and I have interesting views about that, about whether or not we should be separating out these things, I feel a bit conflicted about, on the one side, not wanting to make people do everything, but on the other hand, separating out into silos of people who do research, do teaching, do impact. I'm not entirely sure about that either. But certainly you won't get a leadership post and you won't get promoted in our school now unless you have some kind of engagement impact activity going on. It's deemed to be important in terms of linking with university and school strategy. And I think that's a real positive change.
Right. All right. Well, thanks all three so much for joining us. It was a really interesting discussion, and we'll wrap that up now. So I'll pass back over to Laura for the closing remarks for the symposium.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that really enlightening discussion. Found it very insightful. It's it's been wonderful having everyone part of this symposium today, and we're very grateful to see everyone's participation. From our side, I'd just like to share a few thank yous on that. And yeah, it's been very inspiring and thought-provoking in many ways. And as we wrap up, I'd just like to take a moment to reflect, I guess, on some of the key themes that we've explored. And I think each panel has really come out with some really interesting different themes as well, in terms of in this idea of now how do we navigate engagement and impact. And really this concept, I think, has been really consistent, actually, is it's not just about the ref, it's actually about making meaningful progress and embedding it to have that impact into the real world as well. And the ref is one of these lenses and frameworks that is is important, but it's looking at it beyond that as well. It's been clear that the challenges we face are significant at the current time, but it was great to see this last panel actually finish on this note of optimism as well. And I think we've seen some really fantastic examples of what people are doing, very practical examples of what people are doing across different universities. And today's contributions have shown, from my side, that there are approaches and innovations that can bring us, that are progressing us towards this more embedded and hopefully more as we look forward, more coordinated and aligned engagement and impact future amongst these large institutions, as we see this coming through in their strategies as well. So I'd like to extend a huge special thank you to our speakers and panelists, and for taking the time, for sharing their experience, their insights. They really have enriched our understanding and opened up hopefully new paths for thoughts and discussions across the broader higher education community, not only in the UK, but internationally as well. So thank you as well to our attendees. Thank you for your active participation. It's been great seeing the comments and insights coming through on the chats and the sharing and participation. Hopefully everyone's been able to get a huge amount of value from coming together as a group to have a very open discussion and learn from each other's experiences. I really encourage everyone to carry forward today's conversations and insights into your own work, and hopefully they will lead to continued progress and within your own context. I also hope that you leave today with ideas and ready to tackle the challenges that we currently face, and hopefully feel inspired with new ideas and concepts to take forward as well. So thank you very much, everybody. We look forward to seeing you hopefully at our next symposium as well. And thank you very much for all of these contributions. We look forward to seeing you next year. There is a feedback form that we would love for you to participate in as we sort of bring this symposium to a close. We will be planning the next year's symposium, believe it or not, and we really would value your input as to key topics, things that you would find helpful from the community, from us community. What would be helpful for us to be thinking about? Your feedback, we're keen to continue improving as well. So we really would value your insights and input into that process. So thank you very much, everybody, for the contributions.